Stop living for others. The day you start truly living, have you ever stopped and asked yourself, whose life am I actually living? Not in the poetic, Instagram caption kind of way, but in that terrifying, soul-level silence when the masks fall off and the noise dies down. And that moment when you're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and realize that most of your decisions, what you wear, what you study, what you post, even what you believe, have been shaped more by expectation than by truth. That maybe, just maybe, you're not living your life at all. You're living someone else's idea of a life, and it's slowly killing you inside. This is the quiet tragedy of modern existence. We're surrounded by infinite choices, yet we're paralyzed by invisible rules. From the moment we're born, we're handed a script: be a good student, get the right degree, find a respectable job, don't be too loud, don't be too weird, don't want too much, don't fail, please your parents, impress your friends, look successful, look happy, fit in, be liked, be safe. And we don't question it, not because we're weak, but because we're trained not to. We confuse approval with love. We confuse performance with identity, and we call it normal. But what if normal is the cage? What if everything you've been taught to chase is a distraction from the only thing that actually matters: authenticity? Let's get brutally honest. Most people are living second-hand lives. They're haunted by the need to be seen in a certain way, to measure up to some invisible standard. And the irony, even when they achieve it, when they get the job, the house, the followers, they don't feel free. They feel trapped, because the ladder they climbed wasn't leaning against their own wall. It was someone else's. And when you reach the top of a life that isn't yours, the view is emptiness. Now, here's the twist. This isn't just a personal problem. It's a philosophical one. Because the question of who you are really, beneath the layers, is the most ancient question in human history. Socrates said, "Know thyself, not be liked by others, not fit in, but know yourself." That's the foundation. That's the beginning of wisdom. And yet, we spend most of our lives running away from that terrifying task. Why? Because it's easier to follow the crowd than to face the silence. Easier to be accepted than to be real. Because being real means risk. It means rejection. It means loneliness. But above all, it means freedom.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
And freedom is scary, because it means you are responsible for your life. No more blaming your parents, no more blaming society. No more hiding behind "this is just how it is." When you stop living for others, you step into the terrifying and exhilarating position of creator. You become the author of your story. And for the first time, you realize how much of your life has been on autopilot. So let me ask you something that might sting a little. If no one else were watching, no friends to impress, no family to disappoint, no audience to please, what would you do differently? What would you stop doing? What would you finally start? That question is a doorway. And the courage to walk through it, that's the day you start truly living. You see, the problem with living for others is that it works until it doesn't. You get the validation, you get the applause, you get the temporary hit of "I'm enough." But deep down, there's a voice that won't shut up. A voice that says, "This isn't me." And the longer you ignore it, the louder it gets. Until one day, the life you built becomes the prison you can't escape. The job, the relationship, the identity, all of it becomes a costume. And you start to feel like an actor in your own existence. I know this sounds dramatic, but it's not drama, it's philosophy. It's life at its core, because the question of who am I is not just about personality. It's about meaning. It's about alignment. It's about the difference between surviving and living. And here's the truth no one tells you: you don't find yourself by thinking harder. You find yourself by letting go of expectations, of roles, of the need to be liked. You find yourself by choosing truth over comfort, integrity over image, inner peace over outside praise. And that means disappointing people. And that means being misunderstood. That means walking away from versions of yourself that once felt safe. But what you gain is priceless. You gain yourself, your voice, your clarity, your joy. The kind of joy that doesn't need an audience. The kind of joy that doesn't depend on performance. The kind of joy that says, I know who I am, even if no one else claps. So, why do we keep living for others? Because it feels safer. Because we're afraid of being alone. Because we mistake conformity for connection. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop living for others is the moment you start attracting people who actually see you. Not the mask, not the act. You. And those are the only relationships that matter. And the ones built on truth. This isn't a motivational speech. This is a call to wake up. To stop sleepwalking through a life that was never yours. And to stop sacrificing your soul at the altar of approval. Because the cost is too high. And you already know it. You feel it. That quiet ache in your chest. That's your truth trying to break through. The hidden chains, how approval becomes a silent addiction. Approval is one of the most subtle and seductive forces in the human experience. It doesn't arrive with a warning label. It doesn't shout or demand or threaten. Instead, it whispers. It flatters. It rewards. It tells us, you're doing great, when we behave the way people want us to. And slowly, almost invisibly, it starts to shape us not from the outside in, but from the inside out. It rewires our choices. It trains our attention. It hijacks our sense of self, and before we know it, we're not chasing fulfillment, we're chasing acceptance. Not because we're weak, but because we're wired for connection. The tragedy is, we often settle for approval as a counterfeit version of love. The truth is, approval is a drug, and not just metaphorically. The dopamine hit we get when someone praises us, likes our post, validates our choices, or tells us we're good is chemically real. It's addicting. And like any addiction, it begins with a high and ends with a hollow. Because once you start living for approval, you become dependent on it. You need it to feel enough. You start making decisions not based on truth, but on what will get a reaction. You start editing your life for the audience. And here's the most dangerous part. It feels like you're succeeding, because people clap, people smile, people say you're amazing, but deep down, you know it's not you they're clapping for. It's the version of you that fits their expectations. This is how we lose ourselves, not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small compromises. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You say yes when you mean no. You follow trends you don't care about. You stay in relationships that drain you, jobs that shrink you, belief systems that no longer resonate because stepping outside the lines means risking disapproval. And we've been taught, from a very young age that disapproval equals danger. That if people don't like us, we won't belong. That if we're not chosen, we'll be alone. So we obey, we adjust, we perform. And we call it being a good person. But here's the question that cracks the illusion wide open. What if being good isn't the same as being true? What if every time you say yes to please others, you're saying no to yourself? What if the price of approval is your authenticity, your peace, your voice? And once you start paying that price, how long before there's nothing left of you to approve of? This is the cycle. Approval feels like connection, but it's actually control. The more we crave it, the more we hand over our freedom. We let others become the mirror in which we see ourselves. And if that mirror is cracked, distorted, or conditional, our self-worth becomes fragile, desperate, and reactive. We become slaves to perception. We start asking, what do they think? Instead of what do I think? We check our reflection in other people's eyes instead of our own soul. And the worst part is we think this is normal. But approval is not love. Love sees you. Approval edits you. Love embraces your truth. Approval wants your obedience. Love sets you free. Approval builds a cage. And the moment we confuse the two, we become manipulable, moldable, and hollow. We start living in a constant state of performance, terrified that the mask will slip, that the applause will stop, that we'll be exposed as flawed, messy human. And yet, the greatest paradox is this: the moment you stop chasing approval, truly stop, you begin to find the love you were looking for all along. Because the people who only liked your mask were never your people. The opportunities that required you to shrink were never your path. The likes and follows and polite compliments were never your worth. They were noise, glitter, distraction. But buried beneath all that noise is something unshakable, the quiet, powerful reality of who you are when no one is watching. That's where real confidence lives, not in applause, but in alignment. So let me ask you something dangerous, something liberating. If you never received another ounce of external praise ever again, would your life still matter to you? Would your work still be worth doing? Would your truth still be worth speaking? Would your soul still be worth honoring? Because if the answer is no, then you're not living, you're auditioning. And life is not a stage. It's a classroom, a pilgrimage, a fire. You're not here to impress, you're here to become. The loneliness of truth, why being real might cost you everything, and why it's worth it. There is a moment in the life of every person who chooses truth, real truth, but not performative honesty. When the room goes quiet, people stop calling, friends grow distant, and the approval dries up, and you are left standing in the wreckage of your old life, asking yourself the one question that terrifies most of us more than death: was it worth it? Because here's the brutal, beautiful reality: being real, truly, unapologetically real, will cost you. It will cost you comfort. It will cost you relationships built on illusion. It will cost you the safety of groupthink, the warmth of belonging that depends on your silence, and the shallow peace of going along to get along. Truth is expensive, but the price of not living in your truth is your soul. We don't talk enough about the loneliness that truth demands. Because authenticity sounds empowering, even romantic, until you realize it means walking away from everything that was built on your pretending. It means disappointing people who loved the version of you that wasn't you. It means becoming a stranger to your old circles, your old habits, even your own reflection. Because when you stop living for others, you don't just change your behavior. you change your identity. And that terrifies people, including yourself. Because the truth doesn't just liberate, it isolates. But here's the paradox: loneliness is not the enemy. It's a rite of passage, a sacred clearing, a necessary silence where your real self can finally speak. When you choose truth, you're not choosing isolation forever. You're choosing a temporary wilderness where false attachments are burned off and your essence is revealed. And yes, it can feel like death. The death of who you thought you were. The death of who others wanted you to be. But in that death, something astonishing happens. You begin to feel alive. Because for the first time, you're not performing. You're not calculating. You're not editing yourself for maximum acceptance. You're speaking, moving, breathing from a place that feels ancient and real. And even if no one claps, even if no one comes with you, even if the world misunderstands, you know you're standing in integrity. You know you're not betraying yourself. And there is a quiet power in that knowing that no amount of applause could ever match. Still, it's not easy. The world is not built to reward truth. It rewards compliance. It rewards comfort. It rewards the people who play the game, who say the right things, who know how to smile while dying inside. And when you opt out of that system, you will be punished. Not always directly, sometimes just with indifference, with silence, with the slow fade of people who no longer know how to be around someone who refuses to lie. And that can feel like abandonment. But it's actually alignment. Because when you stop pretending, the people who only loved your mask will leave, and thank God they do. Because their absence makes space for something far rarer, relationships rooted in truth. And those relationships, if you're patient enough to wait for them, are the gold. They are the ones where you don't have to explain yourself, and where your complexity is welcome, where your silence isn't awkward, where your wounds aren't too much, where your presence is enough. But they don't come quickly. They come after the fire, after the weeding, after the loneliness has done its work. So let me ask you something that may change the trajectory of your life if you answer it honestly. What are you holding on to that's only still in your life because you've been afraid to be alone? What friendships, what habits, what identities have you kept alive not because they nourish you, but because they protect you from the silence of truth? And what would really happen if you let them go? The answer might scare you, it might hurt, but it might also be the beginning of everything real. Because the truth doesn't just strip you down, it sets you free. Not in the abstract, not in theory, but in the marrow of your bones. And once you've tasted that kind of freedom, the freedom of being seen and still standing, you'll never trade it for approval again. The return to self, how living for yourself heals you and everyone around you. There is something quietly miraculous that happens when you finally stop living for others and come home to yourself. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It doesn't look like a social media milestone or a dramatic reinvention. It feels like peace. Not the kind you fake with deep breaths and tight smiles, but the kind that settles into your nervous system like a long-forgotten truth. A silence that doesn't scream. A stillness that doesn't numb. A presence that says, I'm here now. And I'm not leaving myself again. This is the part they don't tell you about living in your truth. It's not just about being bold or rebellious, it's about healing. When you begin to make choices that honor your inner voice, you don't just feel better. You become whole. Pieces of you that were scattered across years of people-pleasing, approval-chasing, and self-abandonment begin to return. You remember things you forgot you loved. You reclaim boundaries you never knew you were allowed to set. You start listening to your body, your intuition, your quiet knowing. And every time you choose yourself over the noise, another fracture inside begins to mend. But this healing isn't selfish, it's contagious. Because when you live from your center, you become an invitation for others to do the same. You stop playing roles, and that gives other people permission to drop their own masks. Your presence becomes a mirror, not the kind that flatters or distorts, but the kind that reflects people back to themselves. And whether they love it or resist it, they feel it, because truth has a frequency. It cuts through noise. It disrupts dysfunction. It wakes people up. Think about it. When someone around you starts living unapologetically, when they walk away from what doesn't serve them, when they speak their truth, when they stop apologizing for who they are, don't you feel it? Don't you feel that pull toward your own freedom? That's the ripple effect of authenticity. It doesn't preach. It doesn't force. It simply is. And in a world drowning in performance, that kind of realness is revolutionary. So no, living for yourself isn't selfish. It's sacred. Because when you live in alignment, you stop leaking resentment. You stop manipulating for love. You stop silently punishing the people around you for not meeting needs you never voiced. You start taking responsibility for your peace, your joy, your choices. And that changes everything, not just for you, but for every relationship you touch. Integrity becomes your baseline. Honesty becomes your language. Freedom becomes your atmosphere. And people who can't meet you there, you release them not in anger, but in clarity. And yes, there will always be those who call this selfish, who say you've changed, who accuse you of being cold, distant, difficult. But here's the truth they won't say out loud. What they're really mourning is the loss of the version of you who betrayed yourself to keep them comfortable. And that version of you, that version was never sustainable. It was dying inside. It was tired. And it deserves to rest. So let me ask you this final question, the one that may define the next chapter of your life. What would it look like to live every day from your truth, but even if no one else understood it? What would it feel like to wake up each morning and know you are not pretending, not performing, not negotiating your worth? Can you imagine the weight that would lift? The space that would open up? The person you would finally become? Because that's what's waiting, on the other side of approval, on the other side of fear, on the other side of everything you were taught to be. You, not the version sculpted by expectation, but the one that's been whispering all along, the one who knows, the one who's free. So stop living for others. Start living for truth. That is the day you don't just survive, but truly live.